it's nearly time to begin. So I'd like to say a very, very warm welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here live in our Design Makeover session. Today, we're really lucky to be joined by Jacob, one of our talented brand designers who specializes in designing presentations. Jacob will be looking over 3 designs submitted by our Canva creator community, providing tips and design insights to make great looking presentations. So without further ado, over to you, Jacob.
Thanks, Jess. Hi guys, my name's Jacob and I specialize in Canva's presentations. We do everything from, or I specifically work in helping Canva to present professional investor decks, as well as internal comms across, a team of 2,000 plus to, simple communications and reporting pitches. And I've worked in this space for a number of years. And I've always particularly specialized in helping large enterprises to communicate. But in working, having a lot of experience in 16.9, as well as having experience in other programs such as PowerPoint, I can tell you that Canva Presentations is definitely the most powerful tool for presentations. And hopefully you'll come away with some clear tips on how to use those. So without further ado, let's kick off our presentations design makeover. And to start things off, I'll just talk about how we do presentations at Canva. So our focus is always in making powerful visuals that support your message. The idea of a presentation is obviously to create something engaging, whether it's a pitch, whether it's to inform someone, or whether it's a reporting mechanism. They all work on gaining impressions, and basically our attention spans range from anywhere from 10 to 20 seconds. And so by creating an exciting or engaging visual, you basically help to emphasize that message, as opposed to having someone just speak today or, in any circumstance where there's no visual behind them and the words get lost. Our visuals that support us in a presentation help to emphasize our point. And particularly in presentations at Canva, we focus on our user and showing our users using our product to achieve their goals. So you'll see, even in statistics, we put our users up front, and it's all about creating and emphasizing the point of Canva's experience. We basically use 2 tools to come to a successful presentation visual. We ask the question again and again, does anything in the design detract or distract from my key message? And personally, I use one other tool, and I'll just have to, so if I show guides, as well as, our show ruler tool inside the editor, I can use that to create a grid, and a grid helps us to really create visual organization. It's a really simple tip to make a design look clean and clear, and without having that complexity show through in the final design. The end result is obviously something that looks nice and clean. And back to my previous point, particularly across most user cases, we're either using a presentation to pitch or persuade somebody. We're using it to inform somebody about our particular field of knowledge, or we can use it as a form of reporting. And Canva has a number of ways of exporting your presentation that helps you to achieve each of these goals in particular. So today we'll go through 3 submissions from our creators community. And the first is a designer called My Social Designer. If you'd like to check out their templates, they've got some great business-orientated templates that use some really smart typography and photography. So My Social Designer has given us a really great, what was originally a social media webinar, but looking at the content here, a really nice clean brown is established with some soft colors, but we're going to look at some of the content that he's given here. It helps us with a pitch. And so I've picked out 2 slides in the beginning here. And in a pitch, whether we're trying to sell something, we want it to be crystal clear and establish why we're here today and kick off those topics. And also, we're going into a business in depth. We're looking at our key selling points. And so we want that content to be crystal clear when we're presenting that to our stakeholders, because that's crucial in helping us to achieve our objective. So we'll go back to the original question that I always ask in a presentation, which is, do any of our visuals detract or distract from our key message? And looking at this here, we've got this beautiful photography in the background there of someone's laptop overlay. And we'd like to emphasize that and show that crystal clear if we can. So I'm going to first try and see if we can make the type work on this background by itself. And perhaps we can also increase the size here to 140. We'll see if it works white on. Now, that's quite legible to me. If you need more contrast, we can go into our edit image settings here and just the brightness down so that it's even more legible. I want to see if we can get this across one line here and center that. That's our headline. First and foremost, hierarchically, it stands out. And our supporting message here will establish some key type sizes, but we've also got object sans. So we've got one font, which is a nice, clear, and helps us emphasize. The only other touch point I might think for a pitch is important with your key first visual is to put your logo there. So here's one that I just prepared earlier, just for the sake of time's sake. But if we add that onto the front page, we have all our key touch points. We've got our key message, front and center, our supporting headline underneath, and our brand. Everything there is established. We might sort of balance the space a bit more, size, just to make sure that there's even spacing top and bottom here, and even spacing within the page there. Moving on to the second layout, why are we here today? Now, we've got this holding shape, which we'll use later to establish our brand. But first of all, we want to look at our copy here. So obviously, as an audience, if you're going to look at any particular slide, you're going to want to know what information needs to be read first. And so what's most important here, if I glance at the slide at any time, it's established that what I'm reading is why we're here today. And we've also got a range of topics which we might use to establish our agenda, 4 to be precise. But I'm going to see if we can actually remove this subheading topics here so that we can just have a page that reads very organically, that reads as if you were reading it on a pamphlet. It just goes from end to end, seamless. And it's similar to how we'd sort of read something if it was smooth, seamless copy. So first of all, I'm going to go back to my grid system here. And to clarify, this might look confusing, but what I've actually got is 4 quarters. So I'm going to use a rectangle here with rounded corners because it's nice and soft and it sort of matches the round shape of the logo we've used, which you can find by first searching rectangle in our elements panel. And I'm just going to resize it, and this will help show you how I'm using this grid here. It's in quarters, split in halves in each layout, but it's also in thirds. So if I was to reduce these boxes here, you can see that there's 3 columns, or there's halves columns in there as well. But we've got 4 topics, so it makes sense to split it into quarters. I'm going to take our heading size down. Why are we here? Because it's sort of like in a pitch narrative, it's up to you to sort of establish a storyline that's seamless and makes sense to your stakeholders. And so when we're talking about why are we here today, that's really secondary supporting information, and our topics stand front and center. So I'm going to take the size, why are we here, down to perhaps 24. And obviously that's quite small, and we still want it to be seen at a glance. So I'm going to add all caps, which is here in our toolbar with the 2 letters here. And I'm just going to give it some extra letter spacing because we're using all caps, and capital letters are less legible, particularly at small sizes. So we have to consider giving things a bit of space. I'm going to give it 200, which is just a general rule, which helps kind of give enough air so that if I turn my guides off here, we can read that at a glance and at a distance. And at the same time, 24, I've got my page architecture, which helps to establish that at any time what I'm reading and what page am I. I'm going to make sure that the same size, color, and letter settings as my previous here. Make sure they're aligned. By going to my position tab, making sure they're aligned in the middle there. I'm going to align them to the left and to the right of the edge of my text box so that everything's nice and neat and orderly there. Now, the second thing we're going to do is look at our topical information here. And because you can use bullet points if you were to use it in a list, but because we've got 4 different size boxes here, we're going to remove those bullet points. We're going to look at a topic by itself. And we're going to use some copy here just to help emphasize my point. And that we're going to say my first topic is written clearly and easy to read. So now we're going to do what we need to do to the design to make sure that the first topic is written clearly and easy to read. My color palette is currently using the green and the dark gray. So in order to help me, first of all, achieve the practical components of the design to make sure that the message is legible, I'm just going to restrict the color palette to 2 colors at the moment. So we've got the nice soft green and the dark navy here. And I'm going to upsize this text here to the 42. Let's see what side, whether it's more legible at 42. Okay, and so immediately there, we can see that the topic is larger, it's easier to read, and if it's written organically, your audience will naturally be able to pick up what you're talking about at a glance straight away, which is important for any presentation. What I might do is just consider that because the line spacing here is quite tight, if I give that a little bit more space within the design, it's even easier to read. We've got it visually balanced though, so whilst I could pull the margins out here, a sentence is usually easy to read if it's nice and balanced. So let's say we add a second topic here. A copy is always organic, so the second point naturally reads from the first. Then of course, so does the third, naturally reads, and that helps us clear reading structure. So right now, we've covered off 4 topics. We might want to help establish that these topics frame our agenda. So I'm going to use this first type style because by simplifying the type styles down to 2, my design is easier to digest from any reader's perspective. And that just means that my point is going to come across clearer. There's less things for the reader to consider. So this is topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, topic 4. But the one thing that's potentially missing from my design right now is elements of my brand. So we've got this holding shape that our social designer has used quite effectively to help establish the brand. We're going to use that as a piece of visual language in the background here. We're going to line it up to the top, the bottom of our paginations, and we're going to differentiate the color. We're going to move it to the back. We're going to look for a space here where it sort of adds interest to the page. And that differentiation of color, you can further emphasize it, perhaps. So often, people will naturally use copy to sort of help us navigate through a presentation. If you want to simplify that and reduce the copy, which will help emphasize the message, your second tool you would use is color. So topic 3, I know my reader is going to know that I'm in topic 3 because I establish here that I use the color white for topic 3. Topic 2, I'm going to use the color brown. Topic 4, I'm going to use the color black. It's getting a little bit busy there, and we might just want to reduce it down to 2 colors. But the key point to take away there is really that I'm using color to help reduce the copy and emphasize my message. And we'll show how to do that on the next page here. So here we have a great slide with 3 key points and key visuals to help emphasize each point on how we create content. The first thing here I can see is that we've got page 8, and I'm going to use our established page architecture and bring that across. How we create content is going to be established by our speaker. I'm going to bring across from the previous page architecture at the top here. I'm going to replace the headline.
I've got a quick question, Jacob. A lot of people really interested in how you created those beautiful guides and whether any of those grid structures are automatically available or whether they have to measure them out manually.
At the moment, basically, you'll have to measure them out. Canva is working on grid systems, and certainly I would encourage you guys to express your interest in user features, because like you guys are essentially the controller of how we create this editor experience. So if your interest in having these guides preset is strong enough, then the company will resource enough to build them. There are grid structures coming, but as a general rule, whilst you still have to measure them out, I would stick to a 12 column, because we're in a 16 by 9 or a 1920 by 1080, which is similar to a website, similar to a video, that dimension. So you may actually also be able to find a free existing grid online, but as a general rule of thumb, that size works great with 12 columns. So from left to right, spacing is 12 columns, and then top to bottom is 3. So 12 by 3. So we're going to make sure that our color, a rule of color, comes across to establish that we're in topic 2. We might establish that in our page architecture here, topic 2. And we'll replace our headline, how we create content. So that's great. We're talking about how do we create content. We want the methods of how we do so to be front and center. And we've got some great icons here. And those we're going to assume are relevant to our content. We're going to bring them up in size so that they're a more important hierarchical element within our design, and roughly consistent sizing. Now, for usability's sake and for time's sake, particularly if you have to collaborate with multiple people, it's best to use a single text box. So the second thing I'm going to do here is just bring my supporting copy into my original text box here. And as we can see, they're the same size, and I really want do want my headings to stick out here. Let's say 48, no, too large, go down to 42. But so long as there's a line break in my spacing, I can differentiate here between the two sizes. That's a bit small, 21. So this text size here matches our text size for our architecture. By simplifying so that there's essentially only 2 text sizes on there, it's also helping to emphasize our message. So the last thing I might want to do, just make sure that there's differentiation in weight. So my headline here is bold. And I'm just going to, first of all, turn on my grid again. So my 3 columns, because I've got 3 points. And often we, sort of look to simplify information in 3s and 4s, 2s, 3s and 4s, because it just keeps it digestible. So then I'm going to place my headings for each topic here. 3. Visual balance. I'm just going to see what this spacing I've set up in the center here looks like. Produce my guides. So we're starting to get clearer. I'm going to lift it up to the center, just to keep that the top of the eye line. Well, my icons still aren't they aren't matching my design exactly. So we might look at some of the page branding that my social designer has established. And I really like this sort of like half colored treatment down the bottom, as well as the holding shape used here. So I'm going to copy and paste these shapes across. Bring this up towards the back. make sure that the color matches my icon here. We're going to make sure that the spacing is even. Towards the front. Just get the colors to match. Oops. And the last icon here. So we've used the holding shape that's established by my social designer to emphasize our key visuals here, and that our iconography should obviously support our 3 talking points, but by using that grid alignment and simplifying our text sizes to 2 key text sizes, our 3 key messages stand front and center, the visuals are nice and aligned, all of our spacing and proximity is even between our 3. If I just grab a line, make it red so that it's clear here. Our spacing between our paragraphs and our spacing here, all of that's consistent, and all of that just adds to our tidiness and clarity of our message. Certainly, my social designer's done a great template here. We've just looked at how we can make that communication nice and natural, ensures that it emphasizes our brand. Lastly, we've got a range of ways that you can present your content in Canva. And if you need to pitch, and luckily it's over Zoom, and present in presenter view, presenter view, hopefully it works this time. Now, if we enter presenter view, I'm going to have a time keeping device here, as well as my script, my page notes, which is really helpful if I basically need to stick to a very strict script. But it just helps. My audience will only see my slides, but behind here I'm supported. And that's a feature that you'll find is totally unique to Canva. So that is first template for pitching. A second template that I'll help us to run through, just get guides here, by Christina and Co. Works in the digital space and has some lovely typography if you'd like to do, check her out. But we're going to look at the second case study here, which is for informative. That's because she's provided us with a social media marketing trends template. And that content is obviously going to have lots of statistics and information, valuable information that our user wants to take away. So how can we consider this layout to be as clear as possible, but also relevant to our audience, who's looking to appeal to people who use social media a lot. All right, so looking at our design, we've got some great photography, a young person who looks like they could be a social media influencer, some colorful elements that look like they're common social media designs, and a beautiful, young, fresh color palette to support that. What I'm first going to do on this cover page is look at how we can sort of emphasize the visual component of the design, but also look at if we can establish a stronger brand by simplifying our elements. So let's first of all just restrict some of the page elements for now to see if we can get our image to stand out. I did also prepare another guide for this one, and this one is a really simple half-half with some margins. And what I'm going to do with that first margin is see whether this grid device, which is really interesting, can help us establish a brand here, can be brought into the design, because as well, I'm essentially bringing in a design component that is both visually interesting, but also helps to act as a grid. So then I'm going to take my image, so my grid here, see, line it nicely. I might just see if I can bring her up so that she's at eye line. My pagination, I don't want to lose my page architecture here, because on this design, this is a unique way of sort of establishing session. What I am going to do is just make sure that it's centered within my design here. Going down to the side tabs, dragging these all the way up to the top. I don't want to lose these beautiful, colorful brand elements. I just want to kind of help emphasize them a bit. So I'm going to increase the size. And lastly, we're talking about social media here. So we've got a handwritten font, which I think will be really nice to use for subtext and notes. But, you know, a fun fact is that sans serif typefaces were invented because of digital print applications. So naturally, because our font is designed for the digital space, we're going to test out and see if it helps emphasize the brand in our design. So we've got CALPS. It's a bit of so we've got running across 4 lines. We really want to try to limit the amount of lines our text runs in so that it reads organically. So our first statement is social media, marketing trends, but it's nice and large, helps emphasize the point straight away. So keep that. And I'm going to reduce the text sizes into 2, primarily 2. There is our third pagination, but because that's a subtle feature, we're going to focus on 2 type sizes here. And see if we can fit this. 36. I need to come down to 32 here. Now, if I remove my guides, so a grid component here and our 3D recolorable element are the components of our brand that essentially help to sell the design. Then our visual, which is someone who looks like a social media user, is front and center. And then by simplifying the type sizes on the design, our user has to go to less effort to read what's on the page. We'll look at ways we can introduce that handwritten style later on, but for the practical purposes, and so that our user can digest information quickly, we'll reduce the components down to for now. So on our second page here, we've got some really useful information in the form of a statistic. Biggest startups allocate 75% of their budget to social media marketing. So we really want to emphasize 75% is 3/4. It's the majority of these startups' budget. So how can we look at ways in the design to make sure that our statistic reads as powerful as it does? And first of all, I'm just going to remove our branding elements for now and first establish our text hierarchy. So we've got the Welton School of Marketing Session 1 page architecture here, which I'm going to first of all borrow from the previous page. Bring that across. Needs a bit more contrast here, so I'm going to use a red color. What I'm actually going to do here is a subtle color tip. And that is, I'm going to take from my visual design element here, which is these 2 tones of red. I'm going to bring that and saturate it on the next page. And that's just a subtle way of emphasizing brand, because what we've done is essentially we've introduced this color here. It's not as a primary feature, but then on the second page, if we begin to start to use these coral tones, we're essentially using color as a rule to help guide us through the design. Now, 75%, I'm going to use one of Canva's charts to help emphasize that. I'm also going to turn my guide back on to make sure that my visual content sits within the allocated space I've created here. I think this circular line chart would be a great visual to help create the 3/4, but our line weight's a bit thick. I'm going to bring that down to about 4 there. And I'm going to make sure that it suits the color of our design, the nice coral tones that we've used here. Just going to push this to the back because I believe, not mistaken, should be able to add a percentage label. Now, a percentage label on our charts, it's a really simple way to keep the 2 elements integrated together. If I had kept those 2 elements separate, I would have grouped them together and added to the complexity of my design. Because Canva allows me to add this chart and add all those features inside, all I have to do is drag up this percentage label and it will adjust. But I do have to make sure that my font's on brand, so I'm going to make that CALPS. And it's my key point on my slide, so I really want that information to stand out front and center. Let's see, 210, that's looking good. But how can I bring these 3 points, which all read together naturally, into one text box in order to make my design easier to edit. So first of all, I carry the biggest startups allocate the majority of their budget towards social media. I'm going to bring that text because that point is supports. That text is our supporting point. So I'm going to bring it up in terms of hierarchical value, make sure it's in the center. And immediately this page is beginning to read a lot more naturally. And here is our handwritten font, which looks, similar to how you might write notes on a page. So we're going to use its strengths to sort of become a visual reminder for our statistic here. So if I remove my grid, this reads, biggest startups allocate the majority of their budget towards social media marketing. That's the first thing I read. Maybe my type spacing here be a little bit tighter to that quicker. Nice one there. So the biggest startups allocate the majority of their budget towards social media marketing. That's interesting. How much of the budget do they allocate? 75%. Straight away, those are the first two things I read, and no obstacles for me to get there. And then in the supporting text here, simplifying that down to 2 lines so that it's not distracting against our key message here. We have our supporting text. What's missing from this page though, I would say, is probably some brand, helping to establish the brand that we've used on the previous page. So let's see if we can bring in some of those beautiful 3D elements that Christina has used, which I've dragged onto a page here. I'm going to use this squiggly line and this donut because Canva allows us to edit the colors of SVGs. It's easy for me to resize these on the page. And I've introduced the color rule, and I'm going to stick to that color rule. So I'm going to establish the colors I'm going to use for the next page in this design here. I use blue, nice light blue tones. Maybe we'll change that to the lighter blue. So we have really simple, easy to read statistic with some supporting text, majority headline. And I've used these speckled 3D elements on the second page. Really simple, 1 to 2 visual elements, but it helps establish our brand. And then we're going to obviously look at how we can make our 3 key points here on the next page continue on. So first of all, we've established a color rule. So let's bring in our light blues, dark purples. I think that there needs to be a little bit more contrast here. So I'm going to bring this blue tone closer to the pastel used on the previous page. Our Wilton School of Marketing Session 1, page architecture, we'll carry that across from first page here. We'll turn on my visual guide here. And we'll start to simplify the text. Now, what size text did I use on the previous page here for my heading? 70. So I'm going to make sure that my heading size remains consistent across the pages. Where to start? Now my secondary copy here, I kept at 24. So I'm going to bring that down in size to remain as telegraphed. But we've established that this handwriting font, we're going to use it as a subtext because it's more legible as a little note keeping or used for emphasis and personality. So we're going to look at keeping that as caps. We're going to make it a little bit larger here. We're going to break it by left and right. So I'm going to keep my guide and grid here, but it's used in a different way than it was previously. Now it's used to house text as opposed to previously where it was used for key visuals. And immediately we've got reading left to right, where to start, and 3 key points. I'm going to look at some of the beautiful photography that Christina has introduced here, and she's put them in a frame here. If you inspect all of them, we're looking for a landscape shot. That one's looking appropriate. That will fit the 16:9, but also suits our color scheme, and we can use it as a background element. So this will help create a slide that's nice and visual. Let's see if it makes an appropriate background visual for our slide. And by dragging the photo full size into my canvas, it should automatically stick to the background. Perfect. We can start to see whether this is going to work as a supporting visual. So a visual in our design has moved to the left here. Obviously our text needs to be a little bit clearer, but I still think that that's quite legible on this page. Obviously we've removed the color rule, but that's because we're focusing on some of our beautiful photography, which also helps to establish our brand here. One thing I'm going to bring across from the first page to help me is my grid line here, because I suspect that it might be able to help me structure my text here in 3 lines, but it needs to be subtle and blended into the background. So I'm actually going to scroll down to a feature in Canva, which allows me to pick colors out of my photo. I can see the flower photo here. I'm going to see if this skin color here blends into the background nicely, and it does. So it's not distracting from our text, but it does give us something that we can use to help create a structure. So lifting the first point up here, making sure our text is aligned, and our secondary copy underneath. I'm going to use our grid to bring it 1 pixel in. That purple is not quite clear. Our background here. So let's see if we can find there we go. That blue is. Just aligning my text here along my grid that I've created. Probably that red also needs a lift. Let's see what colors we got. Give it to this light pink. Okay, so let's remove my guide. Immediately here, my 3 key points stick out, but maybe my last point just isn't quite emphasized with color enough. Okay, I just want 3 clear colors to show you guys the last component of the design here. So I've got my 3 key points, but they're looking a little bit floated. And they need some anchorage to the page. Obviously they are divided by 3, but I'm going to use my grid again, introduce a line, and try to establish a visual component that supports one of my brand features here. I'm going to edit my line cap to be nice and square. Up the size to about 15, takes on a bit of shape. And then I'm going to use the same color that I've used for the text here. Bar out my 3 key points. Now that red still needs a little bit of work to create contrast within the design, but our line here, use of our line and our grid helps create 3 clear key points on a page. And a visual helps support our message because it's beautiful photography that you might see on a social media, so on somebody's social media account. So by doing that, immediately helps to tell our audience what kind of webinar we're in. Looking at the 3 slides, we've used the toolkits that Christina's established, and we've just looked at ways we can clarify the message so that the information hierarchy is clearer and more upfront, and our brand is established with less ingredients, essentially.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jacob. We just had a quick question. Just how did you get the color scheme out of the picture?
Okay, so this is a feature in Canva where, let's say I've selected some text and I go to edit the color. I've got my document colors up here, which is picking them out of the document. I've got my brand kit, which I've established in Canva Pro, but underneath here in our default, above our default colors here, we have photo colors. And that will basically, any photo that's imported into Canva will automatically pick a color palette out of those. Really simple.
Fantastic.
Fine. No worries, guys. So our last design is some brand guidelines. Our third key point of presenting, which is reporting, is a presentation which is designed to read later on. So we're going to look at ways that we can use this established brand and make the very content-heavy document, such as brand guidelines, easier to digest. Our interior shop guidelines has a really nice color palette, but want to establish exactly immediately what an interior shop is, and using our brand photography or similar brand photography is a way to sort of immediately tell any audience, give them context to what I'm looking at. So got this beautiful interior photograph, which is on brand. I'm going to size it up so that it takes up an adequate amount of space on the right side here. I'm going to see if I can bring this across the left. Now we've got this beauty script. Again, I'm just going to look at ways we can use that as supporting script throughout the design, and use our primary brand font to help establish our brand and make it nice and easy to read. So we've got brand guidelines here, but color needs a bit more contrast. I'm going to use a key brand color here. I'm going to reduce the line spacing and get it to match the spacing between letters. So my leading there and my line spacing are even, and it makes it nice, lots of breathing space. And because this is a brand guideline, obviously our version script is important here. We also want to establish what our company is on the first page. So I'm going to say interior design company. And perhaps one last component that we can use to help establish that is a logo. So I'm going to go into my elements here. I'm going to go design logo. I'm going to look for something that suits the kind of organic, there's the Canva logo, but by scrolling to the graphics panel, it just reduces it to the vectors, and that looks nice. This line work looks nice and organic and very smart, like an interior design company. So I'm going to establish on the first page, we've got a logo, a company name, our brand guidelines, and our version, and that just helps straight away communicate crystal clear what I'm going to be looking at. Our photography helps establish our brand. The second page here are our palette brand colors, and there's a lot of information to take away. A designer or a printer is going to look at this and need to take these color values away quickly, but also we might have to edit those if our brand updates later. So I'm going to look at break this page out into essentially a key visual and supporting text. And to do that, I have set up another grid. This grid works in 2/3. So our key visual is going to take up 2/3 of the page, so that it's our main focus. And as text, because it's quite small, it's used for context, that's going to sit across. So let's take our heading first of all, bring it across, top right corner. Now, all caps is great for headlines and in emphasis, but if we're creating a document that someone's going to read, it's actually easier on the eyes for us to read. Lower caps letters are just designed for us to be easier to read. So with that in consideration, we're going to put our brand font in small caps. We're going to bring our supporting text across into our 1/3 layout here. So quickly, going to make sure our spacing from the top of brand colors matches our spacing in between our text. And we're going to give this some more, because it's quite small, we're going to give it lots of line spacing so that the user can scan it from a distance. We're going to give it slightly more breathing space in there as well. Now you might notice that my single third here is also cut into 2 columns. What I'm going to do with these color values is I'm going to bring them into a single text box and split them into 2 columns of 3. And just by bringing them into a single text box, it makes it easier for anyone who's reading this to grab what they need to straight away. Also edit that content easier. So we're just considering the usability of our document because our time is obviously valuable. Okay, immediately I can see that my line spacing here needs to be more generous, so I'm going to match it with what I've got above. 7. Change spacing here. Adding the color values. So let's just say I've doubled up, added that in, and introduced all 6 color values. It looks something like this. I've bolded the color heading here so that at a glance, whoever's reading can see the color value straight away. 3 here. So there were 6 colors in the design, and my column here has 6 colors. I'm also going to use this space off to the left just quickly to add numbering, because our numbering will become important later on when my key visual comes across here. And I prepared that earlier just for the sake of timekeeping. What my key visual here does in 2/3 is it explains to the reader a color hierarchy. So immediately through use of territory, we can tell that cyan blue is our dominant brand color. This darker brown is our secondary, and so on and so forth. Whereas we use the light cream for highlights only, and that's using proximity to do so. The only other addition I might add to the design is adding these numbers on top of my blocks of color so that it's easy to establish which color is which block. And last but not least, we're going to grab a page architecture, because that is a crucial component of guidelines or anything that's a long document format. We need to be able to read it later. So evenly spaced in the bottom here. Just give it less emphasis. So we're going to keep this rule of keeping our brand guidelines visual, because our brand is established visually. We're going to look at the ways we can emphasize our image photography here. There's not a lot of text on this page straight away, so I'm in a good position to be able to make this, to really make use of the photography. Let's see if my guide can help me do so. I've got 4 photographs. Let's see if I can do it in a really interesting way. I'm going to flip my 2/3 rule, because I've used my 2/3 rule on the previous page. I'm going to actually reverse it, but use the same guide here. Drag that down to what I believe is about 2/3. So I don't have my guide to help me at the moment. Grab this pot. So I'm going to bring this down to half. I think it will help the other visuals. Nice pottery. Lamp. Our last photograph, desk table here. Right across. And so immediately, by giving our photography the dominant hierarchy in the design, our photography looks like a mood board here. It helps to set the mood of our brand. But we do have to bring in some text. I'm going to use my headline and copy sizing from the previous page here. I'm going to have to bring it in. into the margins. And I'm going to have to make it legible on top of this photograph. So change the heading here to brand. See what it looks like on white. I can probably continue to work that. Bring across our body copy photography, which is actually less here. Also position our couch to be more complementary to the copy, to give more clear space. But our brand photography slide primarily showcases our photography, and our supporting text is obviously secondary. We can get an impression of what our brand's photography is like just by looking at the photograph. And it's brand guidelines. So I'm actually going to share this as a scrolling website. So our website export setting has a number of export options. A scrolling website, basically I'll show you. Our scrolling website is a really great use case for brand guidelines. So we can see that we can scroll through, we can read it at any time, and it adds some nice soft animation to make for a really great reading experience. All right, guys, that's our 3 designs. Give it a makeover. Jess, was there any questions in the chat for these guys I can help answer?
Fantastic. It was fascinating to see those designs really evolve, and it's so beautiful design. It's lovely. We do have some questions. So Relly had a question about your guides, wondering about using different guides for different slides, or whether you choose a grid system and you stick with it for that whole presentation.
Yeah, so that's just the rules of visual dynamic and interest, right? If you can use a slide and sort of like simplify your visuals enough, then your grid is essentially just a guide, and you can break that grid, break that system to help add visual interest and move the user's eye around. I would encourage you to experiment with whatever your guide grid system is, because a layout that copies itself over and over and over again will lose the user's interest, because there's no differentiation. You're essentially looking to maintain someone's attention with any presentation. And so by adding dynamic into your visuals, that ensures that you keep your audience's attention.
Yeah, great. So if you are using different grid systems for different slides, how do you make, because I think when Relly made some guides, measured them out, but then turned them on and off, it was always the same ones that showed. Is it possible to create different ones showing for different
pages? No,
yeah.
It's not. So that would be another feature request, guys. If that's really something you think you'd utilize, I'd be putting your hand up and asking for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so would you use wildly different grid systems? Like if you did one that was kind of a third, would you just like flip that for, you'd still use the same kind of ratios, but you just flip it for different slides, or you would actually use different grid systems? Well,
to simplify your process, guys, I'd stick to 12.3, because that's essentially you create one grid system, and it's comprehensive. It breaks it down into the smallest amount of components, and then you can mix and match inside that. So I would make the most suitable grid for you, and then I would mix and match. Make it so that it's flexible. And a 12:3 grid, the original grid that I showed you here, is essentially the strongest, one of the strongest grids you can create for a presentation. Yeah,
that's a really good tip, because you get your most flexibility. Fantastic. So yeah, some thanks coming through in the chat saying that was really helpful. Thank you so much, Jacob. Just one quick question. So not presentations related, but grid related, because I think people have taken a lot away from how you use the grid systems today. Do you know much about Instagram or socials posts, like whether there's any, you've got your 12:9, do you have a suggested grid system for those kind of things as well?
Not so much the 12:9, guys. What you can do, because an Instagram post is a square, it's really easy to break down into an even grid system, whether it's 3:3, 6:6. Because it's a square, you know that you can break that square into tiny little squares. So it's a really easy format. In terms of like the actual proportion of a mobile phone or a story, it's the same as a 16. It's the same as this format. It's essentially this format rotated into portrait mode. So you could use a 3:12 and flip it around, because the proportions are the same.
Amazing. And that wraps it up for questions today. So a big thank you to you, Jacob, for making that seem so simple and giving us your design insights. That was really, really great. And thank you to everybody who showed up live today. We love having you live on these calls with us. So we hope to see you at another Canva Space event very soon.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.